Howdy, everybody. Dr. Andy Woods here. This is being released on March the 14th, 2025. This is Pastor's Point of View, number 345. We have a prophecy update for you today. I want to cover two topics as you look at our preview slide here. I want to talk a little bit about persecution that's coming, and then also one of the great predicted societal sins of the last days. We'll talk about that as well. But notice, first of all, our first bullet point here, which is persecution. Persecution against God's people. We know that will manifest itself aggressively in the last days. Many verses of Scripture talk about it, but the one we frequently like to quote when talking about this is Revelation 17, verse 6 and verse 15. This is a prophecy about the harlot of the last days. And it says, "I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. When I saw her, I wondered greatly." And then down in verse 15 it says, "And he said to me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues." Of course, harlot is a symbol in the Bible for false religion. And the waters, that symbolism is identified as universal influence over the earth. And this harlot that's coming is going to be so effective in creating the martyrdom of God's people that she's personified here as being drunk with the blood of the saints and the witnesses of Jesus. I don't know of any other way to interpret that other than as we get closer and closer to a fulfillment, ultimate fulfillment of this particular prophecy, that the pressure against God's people by way of persecution will intensify. And there are many things happening right now in our world that are contributing to this increasing persecution. Notice this particular screenshot from Breitbart. It's a screenshot that says churches burn and Christians beheaded. It says South Africa's chief rabbi warns of concerning the after effect of an Islamist's beheading of Christians in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It says South Africa's chief rabbi Warren Goldstein warned Sunday that Islamist militias are beheading Christians in the DRC and slammed the world's religious leaders for their silence on the issue. Something absolutely horrific has taken place in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And to help us get more clarity on this, notice this particular article. This particular one comes from the Christian Daily, and it's dated February the 20th, 2025. And the title of it is 70 Christians were beheaded in the DRC, in a DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo church attack. The article talks about how this is a grim tapestry of violence, and it sort of culminates over 6 million culminates with 6 million killed in 2 decades of war. I mean, this is a story that went really, if not unreported, at least underreported, because it's a story that doesn't fit the narrative that somehow Islam is a religion of peace. Well, the religion of peace struck again. And recently in the Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, 70 Christians in a church were beheaded. So notice what this particular article says. It says 70 Christians were discovered beheaded inside a Protestant church in the Democratic Republic of Congo's North Kivu province, according to reports which say that the victims had been kidnapped by suspected Allied Democratic Forces terrorists. The terrorists arrived in Meba, a village in the territory of Lubero, at 4 a.m. last Thursday and ordered residents to quietly get out. Said Open Doors, which is a ministry looking into these things, adding that at least 20 Christian men and women had to leave their homes, leading to their capture. Later, concerned residents gathered to plan a rescue, but the armed group is said to have surrounded the village and managed to seize 50 or more believers. The abducted residents were then taken to a Protestant church in Kasanga, if I'm pronouncing these names correctly, where they were found beheaded, said the ministry. Families in the area could not immediately bury their relatives because of persistent security threats. The U.S.-based watchdog International Christian Concern called the attack a brutal massacre and said that the ADF held the hostages for days before executing them. This recent massacre, where 70 Christians lost their lives, is not an isolated incident, but part of a grim tapestry of violence that has claimed over 6 million lives in the DRC over the last 2 decades of on and off war, said ICC President Jeff King in a statement provided to the Christian Post. The vast majority of the DRC's residents are Christian, so this is a religious genocide carried out by radical Islamic terrorists. Notice the word Islamic. Notice this took place in these are all church-related incidents. Notice all the people beheaded, decapitated, were Christians. So this is a very clear attack by Islam against Christianity in this particular part of the world. The ADF, which is associated with the Islamic State terror group, notice again the word Islamic, has intensified assaults in northeastern Congo for several years. Meanwhile, John Samuel, Open Doors legal expert for sub-Saharan Africa, described the violence as taking place in a context of impunity where almost no one is held accountable. So those people out there that are so naive to think that Islam is a religion of peace, how do you explain this? And this, of course, would explain why this story is either underreported or unreported in the mainstream media. It's even unreported by Christian ministries. Because a lot of people in the Christian world are moving into this direction of interfaith dialogue, trying to find some kind of common bond between supposedly the two Islamic, Abrahamic faiths, I should say, of Islam and Christianity, which to me is like trying to mix oil and water together. You can't mix Islam and Christianity. They have nothing in common. And in fact, Islam, when rightfully interpreted, when interpreted at face value, calls for this kind of violence. And so if you're into interfaith dialogue, obviously this is a story that you would not want to report on. And if you're part of a news outlet that indicates that Islam is somehow some kind of religion of peace, you wouldn't want to report on this story as well. But the truth of the matter, folks, is Islam is not your friend. Islam is not a race. It's not an ethnicity. To be frank with you, it's a religion in a limited sense. But when you study the founding documents of Islam, what you'll discover is the vast majority of space in those documents is consumed by politics. It is a religion, but it is more important to understand Islam as a world conquest ideology. on par with Marxism itself, with some religious elements. And when Muslims act in this way towards Christians, they are not acting inconsistently with their founding documents. They are acting consistently with their founding documents. If a Christian went out and did this and decapitated Muslims, they would be acting inconsistently with Scripture, which says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, turn the other cheek," etc. When Islam does this kind of thing and beheads 70 Christians in the Democratic Republic of Congo, they are acting consistently with their religion. And I believe that the proliferation of Islam and the growth of Islam worldwide, as it grows, and it is a world conquest ideology, everywhere it gains ascendancy, everywhere it gains a majority, everywhere it gains a foothold, always results in persecution against two groups of people: the Saturday people and the Sunday people, as they call them, the Jews, and then Bible-believing Christians as well. And therefore, my understanding is that Islam prophetically will grow more and more in the last days. It will play a major role in the coming Gog-Magog invasion, Ezekiel 38 and 39, which we talk about many times on this particular program, and it will also play a role in the persecution of God's people worldwide, which is anticipated and predicted in the pages of Bible prophecy. But make no mistake about it, folks, Islam is growing. Notice this particular screenshot from I believe this is called the Berliner, and it says this: first Ramadan lighting in Berlin this year. The screenshot says for the first time, Berlin will also have lighting during the Muslim fasting month of Ramadan. So you'll notice how there in Berlin, the growth of Islam is actually being normalized, if you will. It's proliferating, if you will. And as it grows, the persecution of Jews and Christians will proliferate as well. Islam has been growing in the United States for a long time. Notice this particular screenshot from X. This particular individual says the New York Police Department is openly recruiting for Sharia compliance. This individual says this isn't about inclusion, it's about normalizing submission one hijab at a time. We have 1,200 Muslim officers, 10 in hijab. I'm looking forward to another 100,000 ladies wearing hijabs in the near future as NYPD. Here she's quoting NYPD leadership, New York Police Department leadership. This particular commentator on X says this is the slow surrender of Western values. The hijab isn't just a scarf, it's a symbol of Sharia, a system that says kafirs are inferior, women are responsible for men's desires, and those who disobey must be punished. This commentator asks, what's next? Sharia protocols? Burqas in blue? This is the slow surrender of Western values, and it's happening in broad daylight. You know, we just got finished with a prophecy conference here at Sugarland Bible Church, and Bill Federer, a brilliant historian, gave our final message in that particular conference. You can find it available now online as our conference messages are being rolled out on the Sugarland Bible Church website. And he gave a tremendous message on the truth about Islam. Islam has a pattern everywhere it goes. It kind of presents itself as a persecuted minority until it gains the upper hand. And then it becomes an instrument of the sword. It becomes an instrument of persecution. And this is the kind of thing that we're starting to see in the United States of America as Islam is growing and proliferating. And as I said before, as it grows and proliferates, the persecution of God's people will increase as well, which I'm bringing to your attention on a prophecy update because that's what the Bible predicts for the end times. The end time harlot will be drunk with the blood of the saints. The end time harlot will be drunk with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus, and we're certainly seeing that happen in our world. As much as I would like to say this trend could be reversed or will be reversed, I don't see that predicted in God's word. I would see it continuing to accelerate. So we have that reality taking place. We also have a reality taking place in Europe where it looks like praying in your home, if you are within an abortion clinic buffer zone, is now illegal. J.D. Vance, in a truly historic speech, this comes from the Washington Stand, recently traveled to Munich, Germany, gave a tremendous speech there on how Germany, Europe, the UK, etc., is moving away from its historic protection of free speech. In other words, it's moving away from its historic values. Here's a screenshot from the Washington Stand, February 17th, 2025. It says, Vance's, our vice president, his stirring speech warns of Europe of a retreat from fundamental values of faith and freedom. And he's just pointing out the obvious, that Europe is becoming more totalitarian, becoming more draconian, is starting to, arrest people who are standing in front of abortion clinics who aren't protesting anything. They're not obstructing anything. They're just standing within this artificial buffer zone praying. And now Europe is basically saying, you know what, if you do that, we can put you under arrest. And Vance is highlighting this. He's pointing this out. He's pointing that as Europe moves in this direction, they're moving away from their core value of free speech. In fact, the Prime Minister of the UK recently came to the Oval Office, and Vance spoke up about this there in the Oval Office that we all watched on television. And at that point, the leader of the UK just sort of poo-pooed it and made it sound like, oh, we have a great tradition of free speech in our country, not acknowledging the fact that these kinds of things are happening with more and more consistency, more and more regularity in the UK, and frankly, all over Europe. And so, with all of that being said, notice this particular piece from Breitbart, February 27th, 2025, and it says this: Vance was right. Praying at home could be a crime, depending on who passes by the window, according to the Scottish leader of the police, Scottish MP. So here's what the article says. The author of Scotland's draconian restrictions around abortion clinics has admitted that people who live within the anti-free speech zone could be committing an offense if they pray in their own homes, depending on who passes by the window. British legacy media and establishment politicians were quick to accuse U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance of spreading misinformation after he asserted at the Munich Security Conference earlier this month that people could be arrested for praying in their homes if they live within a 200-meter, 656-foot protest prohibition zones surrounding abortion clinics in Scotland. However, in an interview with BBC's Scotland's Scotcast podcast, the legislation's author, last name McKay, appeared to confirm Vance's warnings. Despite having initially branded the vice president's comments as nonsense and shocking and shameless information, the leftist lawmaker admitted that prayer within a home could fall afoul of the law. Asked whether someone was seen visibly praying in their window within the exclusion zone was committing an offense, the member of the Scottish Parliament said, quote, "That then depends on who's passing by the window," close quote. Yet she still attempted to maintain that Vance was wrong, saying, "I don't know anyone who can pray loudly or performatively enough to be seen outside their house." What J.D. Vance did was to take the extreme. He clearly has an anti-abortion agenda and wants to spread that level of misinformation. Just days after Vance's speech in Munich, in which he warned of an increasing authoritarianism and threats to free speech from within Europe and the UK, a 74-year-old woman was arrested after holding a silent vigil outside an abortion clinic in Scotland while carrying a sign reading, "Coercion is a crime." I'm here to talk only if you want. The woman became, that was her sign. The woman became the first to be arrested under the Abortion Services Act, sometimes known as the Safety Access Zones Act, which was passed in 2023, but only came into effect last year. Last September, the leftist government in Edinburgh sent letters to Scottish residents warning them that activities in a private place, such as a house, within the area between the protected premises and the boundary zone could be an offense if they can be seen or heard within the zone and done intentionally or recklessly. The government went on to call on people to report their fellow citizens to the police if they believe them to be in violation of the law. Can you believe what you're reading here, folks? I mean, first of all, in the UK, you've got a 74-year-old woman who was arrested for holding a silent vigil outside of an abortion clinic. I mean, she's female and she's 74 years old. I mean, she's not exactly a threat to society, and yet they put her under arrest because she holds this silent vigil outside of an abortion clinic. And now they're drawing these bubble zones around these abortion clinics where you can have no free speech whatsoever. And if the zone happens to go across the borders of your home, if you're engaged in, pro-life activism within your home, maybe holding up a sign in your own house, then you can be arrested. And cheer up, folks, it gets worse. They're banning prayer in those vigils, or buffer zones, I should say. Well, what if the buffer zone goes through your own house? Then you can be arrested for praying inside of your own house, depending on who passes by the window and if it looks like you're praying. And here Vance, in this wonderful speech calls attention to all of this. And the only thing people can do against this very dark background is just scream misinformation, disinformation. Vance has an agenda. He's pro-life. Well, yeah, Vance does have an agenda. It's called calling Europe back to something that it used to acknowledge, free speech, that it's not acknowledging anymore. And so this is so typical. Someone calls out the facts of the case, and everyone that's in favor of this totalitarian behavior just screams misinformation and disinformation when it's not misinformation or disinformation at all. It's telling the truth. So these are troubling developments. Lois, last name Miller, Scottish spokesperson for the Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF International, said, "The accusation of prayer being performative rather than genuine lies in the eye of the beholder. Who are the police to doubt the genuineness of someone's faith based on where they are located and the position of their hands? Clearly, the buffer zone is fundamentally flawed when it comes to undermining basic freedoms of speech, thought, and religion." So that's what you want to do in Europe. You want to empower the police to to peep into people's windows to see if they're praying, and then the police are given the authority to determine what prayer looks like. I mean, you want to talk about some unqualified people to analyze the issue of prayer, it would be these totalitarians. But the police will look at things like the position of your hands, are your eyes open or closed? Because if you happen to be praying and your house happens to be within the jurisdiction of one of these buffer zones, then you can be placed under arrest. Vance calls out the obvious, and all the other side can do is deny it, minimalize it, marginalize it, or scream their favorite phrase, misinformation or disinformation, or say that Vance has some kind of, sinister agenda. This is the type of totalitarianism that is now spreading in Europe. To be honest with you, it doesn't surprise me as a student of Bible prophecy that these things are coming from Europe. Notice this particular picture of the statue. The statue at the very bottom has feet of iron mixed with clay, 10 toes. And when you study that out, it's a description of the Antichrist's tyrannical government in the end times, only to be overthrown, not by a vote of the people, but by the cataclysmic, instantaneous return of Jesus at the end of the tribulation period, which is that stone cut without human hands that you see plummeting towards the feet of the statue. This is an image that both Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel saw of the end of history in Daniel chapter 2. And as we like to say, the feet are connected to the legs. The feet of iron and clay are connected to the legs of iron. The legs of iron would represent the eastern and western divisions of ancient Rome. So the fact that the feet, yet future, are connected to the legs indicates that the Antichrist's empire of the future will arise out of the cultural inheritance of ancient Rome. Places like Germany, the UK, Scotland, etc. So the fact that any real concept of free speech that used to be recognized amongst those nations isn't recognized anymore is not a shock, because the Bible anticipates that Europe will be the center of worldwide tyrannical behavior in the end times. And clearly, with the things that Vance has properly brought out, the things that these abortion clinic buffer zones are doing, preventing prayer in people's houses, be arrested for praying in your own home, etc. These things are all preparatory for that coming Eurocentric tyranny. And so I bring these things to your attention related to persecution that's breaking out against God's people all over the globe. Now, it's also happening here at home in the United States of America. Let me draw your attention to this particular article by The Federalist, March 3rd, 2025. It says a Virginia judge rules that a Christian university cannot fire a trans-identifying employee who flouts its values. Let me read a little bit from this article, and then I want to explain why this is so serious, this particular ruling. It says a federal judge in Virginia has ruled that one of the nation's largest Christian universities, in this case Liberty University, cannot claim Title VII protection in its firing of a male worker who only came out as a transgender after being hired and completing his 90-day trial period as a new employee. The ruling is seen as setting the stage for an eventual U.S. Supreme Court landmark ruling on transgender rights versus religious beliefs in faith-based workplaces. In his February 21st ruling, U.S. District Judge Norman Moon, an appointee of Bill Clinton, no surprise there, concluded that Liberty University's employment of Jonathan Zinsky does not interfere with its religious views, contrary to the college's argument in the case. Liberty continued employment of Zinsky does not significantly burden Liberty University's ability to maintain its views and associate for its expressed purposes, Moon wrote. This is huge. I'll explain why in a second. He also ruled that the conservative university located in the right-leaning Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia cannot, as he put it, erect a shield against anti-discrimination laws by asserting that mere acceptance of a member of a particular group would impair its message. According to documents in the case, as part of his onboarding process, Zinsky digitally signed an agreement to abide by Liberty University's doctrinal statement and policies that regard transgender ideology as violating its religious convictions and stipulate that job applicants who are trans will not be considered for employment. Only after completing its standard 3-month employment probationary period, the university alleges, Zinsky revealed he had been taking female hormones for 4 months before he was hired as part of his plan to identify as a female. Zinsky announced he would prefer to go by the first name Eleanor instead of his birth name Jonathan after having been hired. In a statement on the ruling, the conservative law group Liberty Counsel, which represents Liberty University in the case, accused Zinsky, rightfully so by the way, of using deception to deliberately set up the college in an attempt to undermine its religious beliefs and mission. Liberty University's doctrinal statement clearly states that human beings were directly created in the image of God as either biological male or female from the womb. By the way, folks, that's just Genesis chapter 1. And it's a sinful act prohibited by God to deny one's birth sex by self-identification with a different gender, it said. Zinsky acknowledged all of this, despite that he was 4 months into executing his plan to act in opposition to Liberty University's doctrinal statement and employment requirements by denying his biological sex. In its memorandum of law seeking dismissal of Zinsky's lawsuit, Liberty Counsel argued that federal law prosecutors protects religious institutions' right to uphold their religious beliefs and to employ those who aligned with their religious mission and beliefs. Moon, the district court judge that made this ruling, in denying the university's motion to dismiss, concluded that it wasn't even clear if Zinsky had any spiritual function at Liberty University that would impinge upon the college's First Amendment rights to religion freedom. In its response to the dismissal motion, the university cited a federal court ruling out of Missouri that favored a Catholic-run shelter for pregnant women who refused to abide by a city ordinance that required it to hire a pro-abortion employee. In the case, the court found that forcing a Catholic shelter to associate with individuals who did not adhere to the church's values violated its religious rights. Liberty University has the freedom not to associate with individuals such as Zinsky, whose religious beliefs and conduct are directly contrary to the vital religious mission in which Liberty University is engaged, the university says. The First Amendment protects its decision to terminate Zinsky, and Zinsky's complaint must be dismissed without prejudice. Now, that's what Liberty's attorneys were arguing. So you got a situation here where a guy wants to be hired at probably one of the most well-known Christian colleges in the United States of America. They show him their doctrinal statement, which is anti-transsexual. And the guy says, yeah, I agree with all of that. And signs on to the doctrinal statement. And things are fine for what did it say, 4 months? And then all of a sudden, surprise, I don't agree with your doctrinal statement. And in fact, I am a transsexual. And in fact, I have been taking hormone pills to change me from being a man to being a woman. And you know what? Please don't call me Jonathan anymore. Call me Eleanor. And you know what? I've actually been planning this for 4 months because I need a test case against a Christian university. And by the way, I'm doing this deceptively. So Liberty University turns around and says, well, you can't work here anymore. And so a lawsuit is filed. And here this Bill Clinton appointed judge, doesn't side with Liberty University. They side with this Zinsky, this transsexual. And Liberty University's argument is very simple. You cannot compel us to hire people who disagree with our values. And if you're going to compel people to come into our organization and crash the party legally, then you're denying our freedom of religion, you're denying our freedom of association, and you're forcing us through this hiring process to say things that we don't want to say and we don't believe. We stand behind the time-tested First Amendment, and here this district court judge says the First Amendment, Liberty University, is not going to protect you here. Let me just kind of switch the facts around so you can see the gravity of this situation. You know, everybody talks about cake bakers that don't want to make cakes for transsexual weddings because of their values as evangelical Christians. You know, you can't force me to use my abilities as a member of the creative industry to promote something or do something that God says is an abomination. We've seen those kind of cases breaking out across the country. Let's just switch the facts around a little bit. I mean, suppose somebody comes into a Jewish baker who happens to have Holocaust survivors in their family lineage and their family tree. And the Nazis come in and they say, we want you to make a cake for a Nazi rally. And the Jewish cake decorator says to do that would violate my conscience. I'm not going to do it. Here's some other cake decorators that can help you, but I won't want to do it. And the judicial system steps in and says, we're going to make you do it anyway. We all understand that Jewish cake decorator has the freedom to say no in those circumstances, or else the law is forcing him to use his gifts and abilities in a way that goes against his conscience. That is what the legal system is doing right now to Liberty University. You are forced to hire a transsexual whether you like it or not. You are forced to keep on your payroll a transsexual that lied to you on the way in and says he wasn't a transsexual because he wanted to create this sort of test lawsuit. And of course the First Amendment should protect Liberty University in these cases, or else you're forcing people into your organization that have values that you don't adhere to. I mean, what if a church like ours, for example, was forced to hire a Jehovah's Witness as a staff member who has values that are totally antithetical to our doctrinal statement? I mean, certainly the First Amendment would protect us in those types of cases. Well, what you're starting to see more and more is when there's this clash between the LGBTQU, etc. agenda and the First Amendment is no longer a protection. The First Amendment is no longer a shield. And so as the article points out, there's a desperate need for the Supreme Court to step in and give us some clarity here. Does the First Amendment still exist in the United States of America or not? And based on some of these sort of 5-4 decisions that have come out lately, I'm not completely confident that our own United States Supreme Court, with its current complexion, would do the right thing. Because the right thing is to stand up for the First Amendment, to stand up for freedom of association. Because if you're forced to hire people that deliberately hate your value system. You're forcing organizations to give a pulpit or a platform to people who go against the value system of that organization, and you're destroying the First Amendment protections that should be afforded to that organization in the process. So this is a great clash that we are now in. Civil rights used to be given to people who had an immutable characteristic, something about themselves that they couldn't change. And they were discriminated against because of that immutable characteristic. So you'll find in our civil rights law protection for people based on race, ethnicity, national origin, gender, and other reasonable things. But now what's happened is the civil rights movement has been hijacked by people involved in behaviors, homosexuality, being a transvestite, gender dysphoria, people that claim, they're really a woman locked in a man's body, or vice versa. So now we're affording civil rights protection not for people based on some kind of immutable characteristic like skin color, but on the basis of sinful behavioral lifestyle choices. And as that gets enshrined into civil rights law, what is happening is conservative organizations and religious organizations are forced or coerced to buckle under. You will buckle under whether you want it or not. Liberty University, you will have transvestite, gender dysphoric employees, whether they agree with your doctrinal statement or not. And in the process, they're destroying freedom of speech, freedom of religion, given in our First Amendment to people of faith, people of a biblical worldview. And I believe that this issue has been and will continue to be one of the dominant issues of our times. And if the Supreme Court doesn't give us a proper ruling on this, then it's going to pave the way into the persecution of the church, possibly into the underground church movement. Where homosexuals show up on the door of one's church and say, "Marry us," to a conservative pastor, and the pastor says no. Well, all of a sudden that church runs afoul of the law. That's the type of disgusting, ugly, frightening, scary scenario that we are moving into in the United States of America. And I bring this up in a prophecy update because I think that this is a key contributor, if you will, towards the persecution of the church, not just worldwide, but also the persecution of the church right here in North America. Let me call your attention to something that was written a few years back. This is from the Christian Post. This is dated August the 28th, 2018. And it says, 2 California senators declare war on the Christian church. And I want to read to you the words of Democratic California Assemblyman Al Moratsuki, if I'm pronouncing his name right, who basically proposed legislation banning conversion therapy. What is conversion therapy? Conversion therapy is where a counselor of a biblical orientation would seek to use their skills as a counselor to try to talk someone out of the LGBTQI, etc., transvestite, gender dysphoria, transsexual lifestyle. So I'm going to use in California, use my skills as a counselor to try to talk someone out of that behavior, which to me is just normal counseling. It's normal Bible-based counseling. Well, this California Assemblyman proposed legislation banning that practice. In other words, in the state of California, you can't use your skills as a counselor to talk people out of aberrant, sinful lifestyles. If you do that, you run afoul of the law. So he proposed legislation banning conversion therapy, which entails the freedom to professionally counsel someone out of an aberrant lifestyle, such as transgenderism or homosexuality. But what about freedom of religion, protected by the First Amendment? What about freedom of speech? I mean, when I counsel people, do you mean I got to take Romans chapter 1, which condemns the lifestyle of homosexuality, and tear it right out of my Bible? That's what I've got to do as a counselor. And if you're forcing me to do that, what about my freedom of speech and freedom of religion? I want you to listen to the words of this California Democratic assemblyman. He said, quote, and you could look this up online. He says it on YouTube very clearly. He said, quote, "The faith community," now who would those be? Liberty University, counselors using conversion therapy. That's what he means by the faith community. Quote, "The faith community, like anyone else, needs to evolve with the times. The science," what science? Well, the science you're using to say that behavioral lifestyles is the same thing as race. I would call it junk science, phony science. Because Paul the Apostle in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 9 through 11, talks about how some of you used to be homosexuals. In other words, people can change under the power of the Holy Spirit. You can't change someone's race or color, but you can change someone's lifestyle. God is in the business of doing that. Conversion therapy points that out. California is saying you can't do that anymore. So the congressman that proposed this draconian legislation is now responding to the First Amendment arguments of the faith community that wants to use Bible-based conversion therapy. Back to the quote, he says, "The faith community, like anyone else, needs to evolve with the times. The science is clear. The claim that the First Amendment can be used as a defense for promoting fraudulent conduct is a fallacious argument," close quote. So you Christian, you biblicist, you pastor, buckle under. First Amendment's not going to protect you here. You need to evolve with the times. Now, folks, what he just said, Democratic California Assemblyman Al Maratsuki, if I'm pronouncing his name right, which you can find online and watch, is the voice of a dictator. That is the voice of a totalitarian. The Christian position on these types of behaviors is love the sinner, hate the sin. That's a position that goes back 2,000 years. Well, what this congressman, or this assemblyman, I should say, in California is saying is times have changed. There's been an evolution of thought, and you and the faith community need to cooperate. You and the faith community need to buckle under, and the First Amendment is no protection for you, even though the First Amendment has been offered as protection for freedom of religion since our country's inception some 260 years ago. And this is the type of thing that we're moving into, this type of totalitarianism. Things in California continue to get worse. Notice this particular Substack. It says, "Breaking: California moves to ban church security from stopping active shooters." An article by Keith Graves. March the 1st, 2025. It says, "California lawmakers are at it again, this time with AB," that stands for Assembly Bill 1333, a proposed bill that would force church security teams and anyone defending themselves outside their home to retreat before using deadly force. If passed, this bill will legally require hesitation in life or death situations, making it harder for churches to protect their congregations from violent threats. This writer says the bill will pass, and when it does, criminals will know that they have the law on their side because now defenders will have to second guess whether stopping a violent attacker is worth the legal battle that follows. This writer says, I left California for Idaho, where the stand your ground is the law, and that church security members have civil immunity when force is used. But for churches still in California, AB 1333 is a death sentence, he says, for self-defense. And there's a lot of argumentation that he goes into in this particular piece. I would encourage you to download this article and read this on your own. But it's placing on people acting in self-defense an impossible burden. You have to suddenly prove that there was no opportunity to flee, in addition to proving that you were acting in reasonable self-defense when you were taking aim at someone that was threatening your life or threatening the life of somebody else. I mean, the bottom line to the whole thing is this makes the whole concept of church safety teams, church security teams, it places upon them an impossible legal burden. And it will ruin their lives. It will tie them up in court forever. Should you have a rogue prosecutor that happens to hate Christians and happens to hate churches, and we have a lot of those rogue prosecutors. The article points out there's actually a history of them in the state of California. So persecution against Christians has become so big of an issue that now the concept of a church safety team being able to function and to do its job in an active shooter situation inside a church, it makes that kind of thing a thing of the past. And the criminals will know this, and consequently they will prey on the churches. Prey is P-R-E-Y, not P-R-A-Y, prey on the churches. And you have a situation that's now coming forth in the state of California. God help us if this trend spreads nationwide or even worldwide, where not only are Christians being persecuted, but they can't even defend themselves because they have to pass some impossible legal hurdle in an active shooter situation. I think all of these things are disgusting. They're horrific. They're paving the way, ultimately, I believe, for the persecution of the church in North America and beyond. Let me switch to one more very, very quick category as we get ready to conclude here: societal sins. We know from Revelation chapter 9, verses 20 and 21, that there will be 7 major sins that will dominate the earth in the tribulation period. One of them is murders. You see it underlined there in verse 21. Here's actually a list of the various societal sins of the last days. 7 of them, one of them, as you see underlined there, is murder. We know Matthew 24, verses 37 through 39, where Jesus indicates exactly what the world is going to be like when he returns. It's going to be like the days of Noah. You'll see that in Matthew 24, 37 through 39. And all we'd have to do is go back to Genesis 6 to see what life was like in the days of Noah, where violence, Genesis 6, verse 11, violence, Genesis 6, verse 13, will encompass the earth. And so we're now living in a world, and we're now living in a society where murder is sort of being normalized. And so with that in mind, and knowing that's a sign of the end, I want to bring to your attention this article from the New York Post This is a recent article dated March the 2nd, 2025. It says Boston Mayor Michelle Wu, and she's not alone in this because the title says other woke city officials offer condolences to the kin of an armed maniac shot by an off-duty cop at Chick-fil-A. So the article says an off-duty cop fatally shot a lunatic who was trying to stab people at a Chick-fil-A over the weekend, prompting city officials to fall all over themselves to heartfelt condolences to the perpetrator's family. The officer, the hero in all of this, was in the right place at the right time in Boston's wealthy Back Bay neighborhood Saturday evening. Notice also very quickly that these types of shootings happen in wealthy areas as well as in other areas that are more economically depressed. Human nature is the same whether you're a rich person or a poor person. But the officer, it talks about how the officer was in the right place at the right time in Boston's wealthy Back Bay neighborhood Saturday evening when two people being chased by the knife-wielding man, thank God he didn't have a gun, fled into the restaurant fearing for their lives. The cop identified himself and ordered the suspect to drop his knife. When the armed maniac didn't comply, the officer shot him, which he should have, because this man was jeopardizing the safety of innocent people. The suspect was rushed to a local hospital where he was pronounced dead, NBC 10 Boston reported. There were no additional injuries reported. Now here's the clincher, and I'm using this to show how murder is being normalized in our country. At a press conference after the incident, Boston Mayor Michelle Wu, who has been repeatedly mocked for an avalanche of harebrained woke schemes during her brief time in office. So Wu apparently has a history of saying and doing these kinds of things. The mayor of Boston somberly expressed sorrow over the demise of the would-be stabber. She said, quote, "My condolences and of all of our thoughts are with the family of the individual whose life has been lost," close quote, Wu told reporters. And she wasn't alone. Other lefty Beantown officials fell in line to grieve the loss of the attacker, with Suffolk County, Massachusetts District Attorney Kevin Hayden, whose office is leading the post-shooting investigation, offering thoughts and prayers to the identified assailants, family, and friends. Boy, what a textbook case this is for misplaced compassion. Instead of taking this off-duty police officer and acknowledging him as the hero, and fortunately, no lives were lost in this knife attack, if I understood the article correctly. But if there were lives lost, rather than acknowledging lives were lost because of this horrific maniac knife attacker, the police officer who kills this person in either self-defense or the defense of somebody else whose life is being threatened through imminent loss, rather than commemorate lives lost in that regard, rather than commemorate the hero in this whole thing, this off-duty police officer, here comes the mayor of Boston, giving words of condolence to the attacker's family because he was shot. I mean, that's just insane. That is crazy. That is complete and total misplaced compassion. The attacker who was shot, his life could have been spared if he didn't engage in a violent knife attack against somebody else. So his life was completely within his own control. Rather than say something in a common sense way like that, here comes the establishment there in Boston, wanting to give some kind of commemoration to the attacker who was killed in all of this. So we're affording compassion to the wrong people. It's complete and total misplaced compassion. It's moral perversion is what this is. It's like what God said concerning Nineveh at the end of the book of Jonah, in Jonah chapter 4. I want to say it's around verse 11, about the Ninevites, that they didn't know their left hand from their right. That's the type of moral insanity that we're disintegrating into in the United States of America. We're normalizing murder. And that's one of the great societal sins of the last days. And it's one of the reasons God is going to bring judgment on this planet. So with that being said, that's our prophecy update for today. If you look at our review slide, we looked at two major subjects: persecution and also the normalization of the societal sin of murder. Of course, with these prophecy updates, I know they can be pretty heavy and pretty depressing, but there's good news in all of this. Titus 2 and verse 13 says, looking for the blessed hope and the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Christ Jesus. The world is growing gloriously dark because against this morally dark backdrop is the light of this promise that Jesus is going to return and rescue his church away from planet Earth to the Father's house in an event called the rapture, before the wrath of God hits this world because of its grave sins. And I hope you know Christ personally and can be tied into this promise. If you don't know him personally, the way to enter into a relationship with the God that made you and the God that redeemed you is simply to trust in what Jesus has done for you 2,000 years ago. That's a statement more of the heart than the intellect. The intellect is certainly involved, but it's a volition where you're not just acknowledging certain things about Jesus, but you're actually trusting him for your salvation, your eternity, the forgiveness of your sins, and the safekeeping of your soul. It truly is the most important decision a person can make, because once they make it, they're tied into glorious and wonderful promises, not the least of which is this soon return of Jesus to rapture his church from planet Earth. A few infomercials by way of closing. I want to make you aware of our app. It's constantly being updated. Prior content and new content is there constantly. Go to the App Store, type in Andy Woods Ministries into the search engine, and download our free app. I also want to make you aware that Pastor's Point of View is now available in podcast format. Just type in Andy Woods Ministries into your podcast search engine, and this podcast will show up there. And we upload these very, very quickly in podcast format the moment we publish them on our other platforms. I would encourage you to go to our website, andywoodsministries.org, to get all of our content. And there's a conspicuous way on the homepage to sign up for our show notes. And so these notes that I regularly read from will show up in your inbox via email every time we post a Pastor's Point of View show. I am the president of a school, Chafer Theological Seminary. If you're interested in seminary training, I challenge you to encourage you to go to chafer.edu to learn about seminary training without all of the wokeism and bad theology that's so prominent, unfortunately, in other seminaries. Our journal has been out for a little while, and so you can go to chafer.edu and get a free copy of our journal, Cutting Edge Academic Articles. And then, of course, right around the corner is the Chafer Theological Seminary Conference being held right here at nearby West Houston Bible Church, featuring Charlie Clough's historic and influential Bible framework series. He'll be our keynote speaker. He'll speak several times in the evening during the conference, and there's going to be other speakers as well. As you look at this screenshot here, you can see all of the other speakers, including myself. I'm giving a presentation, as are others. So if you can't make the conference in person, encourage you to go to Dean Bible Ministries, where the whole conference will be live streamed and archived. Coming up March the 15th, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, at Candlelight Christian Fellowship is the Stealing the Mind Conference. It's an all-day Saturday event. Speakers this year include David Reagan, Alex Newman, Russ Miller, Brandon Holthouse, Patrick Wood, and myself, Dr. Andy Woods. I hope I got everybody there. Russ Miller, I think I mentioned him, but in case I didn't, I see his name there. A great all-day conference on Saturday. Be fortified in your Christian life with key spiritual vitamins that we need, involving prophecy, the culture war, world events, etc. I believe there's a live streaming option there. You can investigate at the website link that you see at the bottom of the screen there. Also coming up is April 15th, Tuesday evening from 6:30 to 9:30 p.m., a World View radio rally involving understanding the times. And I'm one of the speakers, along with the host of this event, Brandon House, and also Aaron Lavarco is going to be one of the presenters as well. That's going to be a great 3-hour event, 6:30 to 9:30 p.m. You can see where to sign up at the bottom of the screen, and I'm not sure it gives you that address, but it's register at worldviewtube.com /events, worldview.com /events. I believe the event is free, but it's filling up fast. It's going to be held at the Waukesha Expo Center in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and that's going to be a great time as well. I also want to make you aware that my book, The Bible and Voting, is now out and available. There's a QR code where you can find it, teaching the Christian how to vote biblically. And I also want to thank people for coming to from all over the world, quite frankly, all over the country, all over the world, our prophecy conference that we held not too long ago. What was it, maybe a week or two ago, here at Sugarland Bible Church. We had a great conference, and I want to make you aware that the conference messages are now being gradually rolled out. We have 3 messages now available for your viewing pleasure on the Sugarland Bible Church website. And so go to the Sugarland Bible Church website, slbc.org, to access those messages. Of course, on our YouTube channel, SLBC YouTube channel, there is a full archive of the live stream, but I'm speaking here about the individual conference messages that we're now rolling out and making available. We're hoping to have all of those out within the next couple of weeks. And so that information from that conference is available at your fingertips. I also want to encourage people to do one other thing, if I could. Go to the Andy Woods Ministries YouTube channel. And if you want to subscribe to it and have subscribed to it, make sure you're still a subscriber. We notice sometimes numbers have a tendency to disappear over the course of time. And we have a lot of people that call in and say, hey, I thought I was a subscriber to your YouTube channel. It indicates I'm not a subscriber anymore. Well, you can fix that problem just by going to the Andy Woods Ministries YouTube channel and subscribing. That, and making sure your subscription is still there and up to date. All this information we put out as part of our ministry for free. So with all of that being said, we want to thank you for watching Pastor's Point of View today, and we'll see you next time, Lord willing, on Pastor's Point of View. God bless you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. See you next time. God bless you.